Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Joel Stepanek will discuss how to navigate fresh starts in a way that sets us up for success, both practically and spiritually. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions can be sent to our presenter using this box here on the GoToWebinar panel, and I'll read as many of those as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you via email tomorrow. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Joel Stepanek is the Vice President of Parish Services at Life Teen International, where he guides teams that support Catholic parishes in creating and sustaining vibrant youth ministries. He is an internationally sought-after speaker and the author or co-author of a number of books, including Chasing Humility, True North, The Greatest Job on Earth, The 99, and his newest book, Beginning Well, 7 Spiritual Practices for the First Year of Almost Anything. Stepanek earned a master's degree in religious education with an emphasis in youth and young adult ministry from Fordham University and a master's degree in organizational leadership from Colorado State University. He has served as an adjunct faculty member at Franciscan University of Steubenville. Joel, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, it is really great to be here. Thank you.
That's wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter.
Great. Hey, everybody. It is good to see you. We'll make sure we've got our presentation going live here.
There we go.
Got it.
I'll let
Perfect.
you take it from here.
Yeah. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for spending some time with me. Perhaps you are spending time with me over lunch if you are in California or in the Pacific time zone, and maybe you are ending your workday with me if you are in the East Coast time zone, and perhaps I'm just helping you get through your afternoon a little bit more in the Central time zone. I am in Arizona, where it is always Mountain Standard Time. That's one of the things I love about living in this state. We never have daylight savings time. There is no fallback. There is no spring ahead. There is one time. Now that means I have to adjust my times to all of your times when those things happen. So I always miss at least one meeting on daylight savings time because I think it's going to be a little bit earlier or a little bit later than it actually is going to be. But my time never changes. I'm not an Arizona native though. I moved to Arizona actually about 10 years ago, and I moved here for a job. And I had always wanted to live in Arizona actually from the time I was 19. I really wanted to move out to this state. I came to a conference in Arizona when I was in college. It was August. And if you've ever been to Arizona at any point in history in the summer, it's hot. And so for me to want to live in this state after I had been here in August was actually probably a pretty good indication that I would make it here. And I got this job in 2012 at an organization called Life Teen, and I moved my life from Wisconsin to Arizona. And when I made the move, I drove down with my fiance at the time because eventually she would move down, to live in Arizona before we got married. She was going to live with one of my coworkers, and this was going to be where we both lived. Like we were engaged, so we both came down to the state. And I remember having this feeling of moving where it was this immensity of change, like something new was beginning, right? And we got to the state, and she flew back home, and I was here for a couple of months alone, and then she moved down and lived with one of my coworkers, and then we got married and we moved in together. And that first year here was so rough for so many reasons. We had this great new beginning, but we just didn't navigate it very well. We kept looking back at all of the places that we loved and the places that we missed. We looked back at friends we had that we weren't around anymore. And we spent a lot of time comparing our new experience in Arizona, even in the beautiful months of January and February when it's 75 degrees and sunny out like it is today. We would compare it to our life back in Wisconsin. So much so that eventually, after about a year and a half of living in Arizona, I requested to work remotely for Life Teen, and that request was granted, and we moved back to Wisconsin. We had this opportunity for a new beginning, And I feel like we kind of squandered it. Yeah, we're beginning all of the time, right? Like there are a few firsts you get in life. You get your first kiss, you get your first date, you get your first car, you get your, you graduate from high school, you do that one time, you graduate with an undergraduate degree, and you have all these firsts, right? And we only get a handful of those things. But beginnings, well, we're beginning all of the time. And it doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are. A beginning could be going off to college. A beginning is starting retirement. A beginning is your first child. A beginning is your seventh child. We never run out of beginnings. And in fact, even as Christians, we know that death itself is just another beginning, right? I think that there is something very powerful about navigating new beginnings. And if we are navigating them as individuals, or we are in a leadership role, or we're working on a team, or we have some sort of organizational commitment, our ability to navigate beginnings has a profound impact on who we are personally and who we are spiritually. And I really believe strongly that we are interrelated, interconnected beings. And I know this is a truth of our faith. And so there is no compartmentalization when it comes to career, to work, to emotional health, to mental health, to our spiritual health. All of these things are bound up, and beginnings shake all of them up in a very real way. Every new beginning comes from some other's beginning's end, right? Like Semisonic, I don't know if you are a fan of 90s music. I guess it depends. Did you like the Super Bowl halftime show? Were you familiar with that music? And you're probably familiar with Semisonic, who wrote the line famously, every new beginning comes from some other's beginning. And before that, the Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca said it. And it's true. Every beginning we have comes from some ending in life. We're in this rapid succession of beginnings and endings and starts and stops. And that's how we work throughout most of our existence. But about 70% or more beginnings change fails. And this is taken from organizational data. So this is a company saying, hey, we're going to do something new. We're going to start a new beginning as a company. We're going to change an aspect of a process or of our culture, or we're going to release a new product. 70% of those change initiatives or more fail. And this number is a little bit higher when we talk about us personally. Right now, it's the middle of February. How many people are complaining about their New Year's resolutions and how they haven't followed through? Or even how many people have just stopped talking about them altogether? Around January 1st, people make changes for new beginnings in their life. I'm going to begin a new diet, a new fitness program, a new spiritual routine. I'm going to begin whatever. And by the middle of February, most of those people have given up on those new beginnings. Change is hard. And there's a lot of reasons why those new beginnings are tough. For me, there were a lot of things I encountered when I moved to Arizona that held me back from really embracing that new beginning. After we moved back to Wisconsin, we found that that new beginning really wasn't all it was cracked up to be either. And we wound up moving back to Arizona. But when we moved back, we employed a different strategy to engaging that change and engaging that new beginning. We took some things out of a toolbox we realized we had that were going to help us navigate it successfully. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I know the description of this webinar was 3 keys to navigating change, but as I was putting them together, I thought of a 4th. So you get a bonus today. If you're expecting 3 keys to navigating change, you're going to get 4 keys to navigating change, because there's all different types of changes, right? And each of these keys can be applied a little bit more specifically depending on the type of change you're undergoing or that you're helping other people go through. I'm mindful that on this webinar, there's probably some leaders of teams on this webinar, or leaders of parishes, or people who have something to say into the lives of other folks that they care for, whether those are your kids or maybe even your parents. So this information can be applied broadly to others that you're helping walk with, to an organization, and to you personally. There's an author that I really enjoy named John Acuff, and he has a book called Do Over, where he talks about how we might find new starts in our career. And he defines 4 different types of changes that are voluntary and positive. And the positive is like an emotion we have that goes along with that, right? So this is a voluntary, I'm choosing this change, and I have positive feelings about the change, I have positive feelings towards the change, right? So this is when we apply for a new job that we're really excited about, and we get offered that job and we accept that job. Well, it's a voluntary change, and it's positive. There's also voluntary changes that can be a little bit negative, or we can have negative feelings about. And this would be something maybe like starting a new diet. My wife and I last January did Whole30. And if anybody has ever done Whole30, like the legitimate Whole30, some people say they do Whole30, but they allow like cheat meals and stuff. And if you read the Whole30 book, the authors are very clear that like there's a specific way, like it's pretty hardcore, but it's only 30 days. Like, how hard can it be? Pretty tough. Those types of changes, whether it's diet or fitness, sometimes they're voluntary. We want to do them, but we don't always have great feelings about them right away. For many years, I worked as a personal trainer, and this was a hump that we had to get over with clients. People wanted to make a change for their health, but there are some negative feelings associated with that. Sometimes we become really self-conscious, we get sore, we miss the way that things used to be, or the foods we used to eat, or the lifestyle we had. It's a hard change, even though it's voluntary. There are changes that are involuntary and negative, right? You get laid off because your company downsizes, or COVID happened and you lost your job. Sometimes we have a relationship that ends where we didn't want it to end, we didn't think it should end, but the other person has decided that that relationship needs to end. Those are involuntary moments that we have negative feelings associated with. And then there's also involuntary things, involuntary change that are positive. We get a promotion that's unexpected at our job. Like, we didn't volunteer for that, we didn't seek that out, but it kind of happened. And there's change that takes place there as well. We have positive emotions associated with it. Now, in each of these quadrants, nobody's at one pure place usually in most of these changes. It's a mix of a little bit of everything. But there's 4 keys that we can employ personally and professionally and corporately when we're looking at changes that are voluntary, involuntary, negative, or positive. And these are the 4 keys: remembering why, living joy and celebrating wins, creating rituals and stability, and finding your Jedi. Now, all 4 of these things can be applied to any new change, regardless of if it's voluntary, involuntary, positive, or negative. These 4 things are going to help you manage that change well. Depending on what type of change it is, though, what type of new beginning you're having, one of these may be a little bit more important than the others. So we're going to walk through these 4 pieces and break them down, both how we can live these out personally and how we can live these things out professionally, especially if we are serving in a ministry, we're serving in a church, or maybe you have another job in a leadership role. These things apply corporately as well. And I'll remind you that as I'm working through these things, go ahead and use that question box, drop your questions in, and we'll have time at the end to get to some of those things and interact a little bit as we walk through these 4 keys to navigating any new beginning for yourself, for others, or for your team. Let's start with remembering why. This is the motivation to change. And we really apply this heavily when we're talking about changes that are involuntary, that are voluntary, but are also kind of have a negative feeling associated with them. Now, all of the food pictures associated with this are in fact Whole30 meals. They are meals that you would eat on Whole30, and though they look good on these pictures because somebody professional took them, I assure you that eventually all of these meals get very boring. That actually was one of the toughest parts about Whole30 for me, is though you could eat actually a pretty wide variety of food, eventually those food combinations become pretty numbing. And the authors of Whole30 even talk about this. They say about midway through, you may find yourself really not excited to eat anymore. You may find yourself without any appetite because there's only so many meals of potatoes and ground turkey and eggs that I can eat before I just would rather not eat at all. And a part of that change is helping a person overcome maybe some disordered attachments they have to food, or a disordered attachment to sugar, or even a physical dependence on sugar. So the program itself is a good thing, but what makes it tough is that middle part where it just doesn't feel good anymore. This is where remembering why we are starting a new beginning, why we're making a change, becomes so critical. Now, when you think about remembering why, there's some practical things we can do with this. And the first is sort of casting a vision. Where do you want to be? What's the point of this change? Why are you doing it? If you're a person who's a leader in an organization, this is especially critical. If you've ever been a part of a company that's undergone some new beginning or some change, you know that the ability of the leaders to cast a vision for where we're going, what is the desired future state, is so critical to people actually buying in to that particular vision. This is where a lot of change initiatives, a lot of new beginnings actually end up stumbling. Because rather than looking out for where I'm going to be, rather than vision casting, I get so caught up in the moment. We have to remember our why, because when things get difficult, when we hit friction, when we don't like it anymore, when it's not as fun, we have to lean back on that vision. So if you're in a leadership position, you need to be sure that as you are going to implement change or bring a whole team into a new beginning, you are casting a vision effectively and you're communicating it well. When we talk about communication, this is bringing other people into the decision, bringing other people into the rationale, to explaining it, and using a blend of good reason and also emotion. Getting up in front of a group of people and saying, hey, we're going to have this new beginning. We're taking on this new initiative. without any emotion, without any excitement, isn't going to bring people on board. You have to remember, especially if you're a leader in an organization, change impacts people. It has an effect on their day to day and their life. And generally, people can be a little bit resistant to that. So we have to cast a vision, but then communicate it well and bring people into it. As you make a change, as you enter into a new beginning corporately, are there conversations that need to happen ahead of time so you really understand where people are at before you make the change? Absolutely. Have conversations with people across the organization so that as you enter into that new beginning, you're going to understand where people are coming from. And they may show you some blind spots that you were unaware of that are going to help you really launch and cast that vision. This applies personally, though, as well. We have to know why we're doing something, because when it gets difficult, we can lean into that. It was a few years ago when I decided I wanted to take my health seriously. Years of ministry had taken its toll on me. I was a youth minister for many years. I was traveling a lot after I had gotten out of parish youth ministry and moved into work at Life Team and started doing some itinerant and speaking ministry. And it showed. I felt awful. There was one day I was playing with my kids on the floor and they got up to run off. And it was like one of those, all right, give daddy just a second, because I'm winded getting up off of the ground. And I knew I had to make some changes in how I was eating and how I was exercising and how I was taking care of the gift of my body that God had given me. And when I thought about that, the vision I cast was this idea that one day I would be a healthy dad who could keep up with my kids until they were teenagers. That's sort of the vision, that I wanted to never tell them no if they asked me to do something with them that was athletic or involved exertion or some sort of physical element to it. Recognizing that in my life as I get older, and this is true for all of us, there might be things that I can't control about my physical health. So I was going to do the best I could to steward my health. And that was the vision I cast. And anytime it would get difficult when I was working out or I was eating healthy, I would think about going on a race with my son. I would think about running and playing soccer with my daughter someday. And those things pushed me through. I also communicated that vision to my wife. She was going to be a key aspect in that because my lifestyle change was going to have an impact on her. Sometimes when we engage in new beginnings personally, we don't communicate that to other people who could be a really great support network or who also might be impacted by our decisions. Like with my wife, I choose to eat in a certain way, and that impacts how we grocery shop. It impacts how we meal prep. It impacts how we spend time on a Sunday. And those are all things that she's got to be looped into and she's got to be bought into. You see, getting buy-in from people just isn't about things corporately. It's about getting buy-in from the people in your life. It's also getting support from them. Because if you're going to embark on a new beginning, like maybe sobriety, you could take that as a change, which is a voluntary, but can be an initially negative change. I can have negative feelings. It's hard to do that. Now, eventually it becomes a positive change, but initially it might be tough. Does your support network know that you're making that decision so they don't offer you a drink, so they don't ask you to go out? Maybe a few of them even say, hey, you know what? I am going to stop drinking with you. Communication is key. When we start in the beginning, there's also a key to have a sense of urgency. We can't wait on it and keep saying, well, I'll start tomorrow. If we know we want to make a new beginning, we know we want to make a change, whether it's corporately or individually, realize a sense of urgency. How are we going to do this now? And get people on board with the rationale for why this has to happen today. A lot of times, this is where change initiatives also fail. We say we want to make a change. We know we need to make a change, but we just never get around to it. The next piece of remembering why is recognizing the emotional state, either of others who are going to be impacted by your change if you're leading change, or of your own emotional state when you are making some decisions to change. Where are you at and where are other people at? Let's talk about this organizationally for a minute. A lot of times we might make changes organizationally in a ministry, in a parish, and a company without understanding where people are at. This happened, I think, in a lot of places over COVID. And people navigated it to different degrees of effectiveness, right? Everybody during COVID in those early months was forced with incredible change in our world, right? They were psychologically taxed, emotionally fearful, sad, tired. That's where people were at. At the same time, companies, organizations, and ministries had to make some changes and decisions to pivot so that they could stay viable and continue to serve people during that time. So you have these two groups, one group of employees who are tired and sad and burnt out and psychologically frazzled, and also leadership that knows you've got to make some changes. The companies that were able to navigate things recognized the emotional needs of people, took time to understand it, took time to have conversations, took time to be vulnerable and understand where people were at, and then they made the change. The companies that weren't successful looked at their employees and said, we can't make any changes right now. They're too frazzled. Or they said, who cares? We've got to make changes because right now it's sink or swim. They also failed. The same is true for us personally. When we start a new beginning, we have to be aware of where we are at. What things might cause some resistance to change? Am I fearful? Am I anxious? Am I doing this for something other than just for me, but for somebody else? Where is my emotional state? Like one great example personally is if you end a relationship and you're sad, suddenly being like, I need to get healthy because if I get healthy, I'll win that person back. See, that's not a good why. But understanding that perhaps there are some things I need to work on to improve, and that it's not about me being sad, but it's about me being the best version of myself who God calls me to be, that's a different motivation. The last piece here, and I'm recognizing why, is understanding resistance, both in myself and outside. Is there going to be things that make it difficult to attain this new vision? Anytime we initiate change, there's always going to be some resistance internally and externally. Identifying where those things are. Where is it going to be most difficult to live up my new diet? How is it going to be most difficult to engage in this new spiritual practice? Who is going to be for me and who is going to be against me? Where is resistance? Identify those things. In some cases, in the case of an organization, those are the places you may need to work to bring people on board and get buy-in. The same thing could be true in your personal life. And in other cases, you may need to say, those are places I have to avoid right now because it is not going to be good for me. So if we find ourselves in a voluntary decision, a voluntary beginning that maybe is going to have some negative feelings associated with it, at least initially, we need to remember why. Now, sometimes we find ourselves in an involuntary beginning and it has some negative emotions attached to it. This is where rituals and stability are so important. They provide anchors of uncertainty. These are challenging things to think about because when we talk about beginnings, sometimes they happen in sad circumstances too. Not every beginning is positive. The death of a loved one is a new beginning. When a spouse dies, we start something new, a life without that person. That's sad. That's not a beginning that we want to undertake. But if we're married, for many of us, that's a real possibility in our life. We lose a job. I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to get laid off, but here I am. It's involuntary and it's negative. How do we move forward in those situations? We find rituals and stability. Rituals are the operalization. I can't say that word. Rituals make concrete our beliefs. There we go. That's a better way of saying it. Rituals make concrete our beliefs. That's why they're so important in our faith. It's the law of creed and the law of belief, lex credendi, lex orandi, right? The law of belief, the law of prayer. We pray as we believe. So we don't just have rituals because we thought they were great things to do. They are a concrete way of expressing and symbolizing and making present aspects of our faith. This is true in our life as well. And rituals provide stability, and we need that in change. When we find ourselves going through a lot of change, we may experience change fatigue or change turbulence. And these are two words that are important for you to be aware of personally. And again, if you lead a team organizationally, these are some key aspects as well. Change fatigue happens when there's too much change at once. Sometimes this happens in a company, sometimes this happens in our life. It happens in a company or in an organization when the leader reads a new book and they decide we're going to change everything and we're going to switch it up. But then a month later, she attends a webinar and decides, oh my goodness, there's a whole new set of things we need to do. Or a leader decides that he's going to switch up a process completely, but 2 months later, after he thinks it's not working, he's going to switch up the process again. And this sort of back and forth can cause a burnout on people where they don't want to change anymore. They just want stability. Change turbulence happens when there's a lot of change all at once and it's all uncontrollable. Again, COVID-19 was a great example of that. Overnight, everything changed. All of us experienced that type of change turbulence, and eventually change turbulence goes away. But like turbulence on an airplane, sometimes we don't know how long it's going to last, and sometimes it comes up out of nowhere. These things can happen to us personally as well. If we try to make too many changes in our life at once, we experience change fatigue. It's the person who decides they're going to make 8 new resolutions on New Year's, and about a week later, they're like, I can't keep up with all 8 of those resolutions. I might as well not do it at all. Now, we can combat these things with rituals and stability. Stability is necessary in change. I had asked a question a while ago by an individual who was like, don't you feel like older generations were a bit more resilient and a bit more adaptable to change than current generations are? Which is a really great question. And I love talking about generational theory. But I think one of the key differences when it comes to older generations and maybe their ability to adapt to change or sort of dive into the deep end or start new beginnings was that there was a greater sense of stability in some of the key institutions that lacks a bit more today. and stability is necessary for change. If you're engaging in change, for example, in an organization, and you want to have a new process or a new product or a new initiative or a new ministry, having a cultural stability to support that change is necessary. Anytime there are changes, people get freaked out because they wonder what is going to happen to me. This is where having an understanding of where people are at emotionally and psychologically, and having a place where it's emotionally and psychologically safe can also be a place where we can initiate change. So again, I'm thinking corporately and organizationally here, and how do we help others navigate change? How do we help our coworkers, our staffs navigate change? How do we help our teams navigate change? We have to ask ourselves, have I created a culturally stable environment? And have I created an environment that is emotionally and psychologically safe? Another way of saying that is, have I created a place where people can authentically be themselves? Or are people putting on armor and masks to come into work? We may find ourselves even doing that. When I go into work, do I feel like I have to put on armor to protect myself against other people? Do I have to pick up a shield to make sure that people don't get too close? Am I putting on a mask and acting a certain way so that people will accept me, or people will think that I fit in, or people won't judge me? Those are markers of an environment that is not emotionally or psychologically safe. And empirically, I can tell you that environments that are emotionally and psychologically safe are more innovative, creative, and just all around are better places to work. I think sometimes we hear these words and we're like, oh my goodness, here's another millennial talking about being emotionally safe. But the truth is we all long for that. And if we break things down, none of us want to be in an environment where 8 to 10 hours a day, we're trying to pretend to be somebody we're not, or we feel like we're in a battle. So many of us go home from work feeling exhausted, and it's not because the work we're doing is tough. It's because all day we've had clenched fists ready for a fight. You, if you're a leader, can do something about this by leaning into conversations, by displaying some vulnerability, by displaying some humility, and creating an environment where people can authentically be themselves. This layer of stability is going to help you when you look at those same people and say, we have to make some changes. I've got a new idea. Let's start a new beginning. Rather than everybody rolling their eyes and groaning and being like, oh my goodness, here we go again. I don't want to do this, and trying to fight you, people will say, okay, I trust the leadership. I trust the person who's directing me. I believe that we can get through this. This is true personally as well. Look for the places where you can be emotionally and psychologically safe as you're initiating a new beginning. Who can you go to talk about the ups and the downs? Who can you confide in when you have that negative experience of an involuntary beginning? Who's going to just listen to you and not gaslight you? Who's not going to try to remedy all of the problems? Who's just going to be present and walk with you? Who can accompany you? Who is an emotionally or psychologically safe person for you? I think this becomes especially true when people are dealing with grief. Again, one of those big involuntary negative changes often is the death of a loved one. But there's different ways that people deal with that. Sometimes people are very afraid of death, and though those people might be good friends in other areas of our life, they might not be the best person for you to walk with. Their own fear of death or their own struggles with death might not allow them to be a safe person for you to walk with in grief. That's why for many of us, considering a counselor or a therapist in these moments is key in providing a place for emotional and psychological safety. That's stability, but there's also rituals. Rituals provide us with an anchor. There are two ways we use rituals in change. Change can help be embodied in a new ritual, and rituals can also provide a sense of stability in change. Let's talk about rituals as a thing that embody change. In order for a change to be solidified, whether it's personal or it's corporate, we need to have some sort of ritual that accompanies it. So if you want to get into a new fitness routine after January 1st, what is the ritual? The ritual is every day I wake up, I drink 24 ounces of water, I have an espresso, I put on my shoes, I get into the car, I go to the gym, and it's the same ritual every single day, 5 days a week. Now you might be saying, well, hey, that's a routine, but if we ritualize it, if we make it something that is embodying the belief that I deserve to be healthier and I'm casting the vision of a healthier me, suddenly I've made that something more than just a routine. The same is true for prayer. When we talk about having a new prayer routine, how am I setting up for prayer? Do I have a place that I go? Have I set aside an area in my house to pray? Do I have specific prayers that I pray? Is there sort of a way that I get into this prayer routine? See, that goes from routine to ritual because I'm taking the belief and I'm concretizing it into ritual. If you are leading a team, having rituals that embody the change is critical because repetition is so key in making sure that a change or a new beginning takes root and becomes a habit. We have to have a plan here. Now, ritual can also provide a sense of stability. When we move to a new place, finding rituals can be anchors for us. For me, when I moved to a new place right after college, one of the things I wanted to find was a new coffee shop. I love to go to little hipster, you know, small batch coffee shops, and that's an important part of my work and just me psychologically, like having that spot that I can go to. And so right away when I went to a new city, I tried to find that place. Where is my place going to be? That is, not like a Starbucks, but like an actual like hipster coffee shop. And once I found that, then I was able to lean into a ritual of getting a Saturday coffee, doing budget, doing some writing. And that's an important part of change for me because it gave me an anchor. Even though I'm in a new place, doing something different with new people, surrounded by new things, this one thing can stay the same. Prayer then becomes non-negotiable when we talk about this as Christians. Whether you are leading change corporately as a ministry or as a parish, making sure that people are praying into the change, praying for the change, praying for themselves through the change, and then keeping a prayer routine in the change is essential. We know we shouldn't, but prayer is so often the first thing cut, isn't it? Like when we have a new change and life is crazy and things are different, we think about all of the stuff we need to do, and then prayer becomes an afterthought. I would say this, in moments of change, especially personally, double down on the prayer. Make that a non-negotiable piece because it provides stability, especially in times where change is involuntary and potentially negative. Sometimes we have change, though, that is involuntary and positive. This is where you need to find your Jedi. Now, maybe you're not a Star Wars fan, but if you are, Empire Strikes Back is the best of the nine movies in the series, which should be about the Skywalker family. But because of the last episode, it became about the Palpatine family. But I'm not going to get into that because this is not a webinar about that. This is a webinar about new beginnings. And when I say find your Jedi, I really mean find your mentor. Mentorship is so key to starting new beginnings anytime because we're doing something where we haven't gone before. The very act of something being a new beginning or a change means that it's uncharted territory for us, but it's not uncharted territory for everybody. There are people who have walked these roads before, or at least walked roads that are similar. And so finding those people gives us an advantage. It helps us to be prepared for what's coming because we don't necessarily know what's ahead, but somebody else does. It's like getting a cheat code in a video game and learning all of this information so that you can start that much further ahead than even a mentor did. To do this, though, you need humility in order to grow. Again, if we have a change that's positive and involuntary, it's probably something that's bumping us up somewhere because we're not choosing to do it. It's probably taking us even into a new frontier where we've never like necessarily been before. And that requires finding somebody who can help us walk that way. If you are in a corporate environment, a job, a ministry, a parish, and you're a leader, you have to ask yourself, how are you going to help other people on your team navigate these moments? Because if you have people who are growing, and hopefully you're a leader that's helping people grow, you're going to put people into positions that they've never been before, doing things they've never had to do before. And that is so exciting and so crucial to building a great team and building up the kingdom of God. But if you don't give them the tools that they need, they might flounder. Look for internal and external mentors for people. And this is true both personally and professionally. An internal mentor is somebody inside of your parish, your ministry, your company, who's able to teach you about that company, about that role, about that job, who's done it and been there before. So if you're hiring a new person at your parish, it might be good to assign them a new mentor. If you're hiring a new person at your company, to assign that person an internal mentor, to tell them about how things work. What's the culture like? What are the expectations? How does the community engage with your parish or with your organization? Those types of things are invaluable and take a person, it condenses like 4 months of work into maybe a week. It also gives that person an advocate internally. We also need external mentors, though. You see, people inside of an organization, a company, even a parish, are often concerned about the goals of the parish, the company, the organization. But an external mentor is usually just concerned about you and your individual growth and development. We all need those people as well. I took on a new job a couple of years ago, actually since September 2019. I became the vice president of parish services at Life Team. What a time to become an executive in an organization, just a mere 6 months before, the world absolutely collapsed. One of the things that I did early on, though, which helped me, was find external mentors, people who I could meet with over coffee, who could answer my questions, who I could bring situations to, and they could give me advice. And their advice wasn't interested about hitting any organizational goal or doing anything for the company. Their advice was interested in my personal growth and development. And that's what made it so valuable. Find some of these people. Find your Jedi. Remember the Jedi in Star Wars, what do these people do? They train people to become like them and to become greater than them, to be forces for good. We can't always find mentors, but if you're a leader in an organization or you're wanting to grow personally, you may just find places to get training, to learn something new, to fill in your skill sets and some of the gaps that exist. Again, in my own life, one of the things I recognized after being an executive in an organization was that there were places that I definitely needed to grow as an organizational leader. So I found a program that was a Master of Science in Organizational Leadership at Colorado State University. I did some research into it, got really excited about it, and then signed up for that program and made it work. That has been an absolute blessing in my life, but it was a way that I found training to fill gaps. For you, it might be a degree, or it could be a certificate, or it could just be taking a bunch of online courses. There are so many free online courses that exist right now where you can learn. Don't negate the power of lifelong learning when it comes to those involuntary but positive shifts in our life. One other thing you can look for are just the idea of formal and informal mentors in your life. Formal mentors are people we've actually asked to be our mentor, but we can have informal mentors all over the place. I have authors who are my informal mentors. They don't know that they're mentoring me, but they definitely are because I read their books and I follow them online. And quite honestly, some of those people maybe one day could be a formal mentor. It's never been easier to reach out to people who you don't know that you would never have access to online and actually get a response for them. Whatever you need to do, any new beginning requires a new a Jedi, a mentor. Think about it again for marriage. We do this in marriage counseling, pre-marriage counseling. You get linked up with a mentor couple, usually people who've been married for several years, who can give you some understanding about what marriage is like so that new beginning can be highly successful. So again, it applies across the board, but it's especially true when our new beginnings are involuntary but positive. The last section we have, though, are those beginnings that are positive and voluntary. And this is where we need to live joy and celebrate our wins. In August of 2020, a friend of mine said, hey, there's this football league starting. It's a flag football league. Would your son want to do it with my son? And then there was another friend who said, yeah, let's join a team together. And my son loves football, so we said, sure, like, let's go. Well, let's do flag football. That's a great thing to do. Get some activity outside. It'll be awesome. And so we joined this team. And that's the big picture, is actually the day of our first game at this park. It was me and him. He's getting ready to go play some flag football. And his team got annihilated. Like, how good could 6-year-olds be at football? Turns out really, really, really good. Like, really good, insanely good. And they got demolished. It was a bad game, and parents were like distraught, and it was tough to watch. After that game, the coach that we had left for a variety of reasons, and the parents asked me to be the coach. Why did they ask me to be the coach? Because I was the only person who knew all of the kids' names. And the only reason I learned the kids' names was because my son didn't know any of their names, and I have a history as a youth minister, and I just couldn't handle him being on a team where he didn't know the name of anybody. So I took it upon myself to help him learn the names, and I learned all of the names, and apparently that's qualification enough for a person to be a Pee Wee flag football coach. So it was a new beginning. Something I had never done before. I had never been a youth coach of anything ever, let alone a Pee Wee football team, flag football team. Well, I'm in my 4th season with that team, and it has been an absolute joy and blessing. It was a voluntary thing that was a positive thing. I was excited about it because I was going to get to spend some time with my son. And those are the other pictures that you see up, is me with him in that first game. But then the upper right-hand corner is me and my son before one of our games this recent season, this past winter season a couple of weeks ago. And then the lower right-hand corner is me actually and him. Just kind of a cool picture of a race that we did, because my fitness journey, my journey to stay healthy, the vision I have of doing things with my son and my daughter that are athletic has come to be realized, as he and I did a turkey trot this past Thanksgiving and ran a mile race together on Thanksgiving morning. And that's the stuff that I wanted to do. And I put these things up here because now my fitness journey, my health journey, has gone from being a voluntary negative experience to a voluntary positive experience. My journey with football is a voluntary positive experience. But remembering why and having mentors and creating stability in those moments where it's voluntary and positive always isn't enough. We've got to keep our joy. Because even in those experiences, we can get tired and we can get bogged down and we can get cynical in those moments. So here's a couple ways that we can live that joy. And this is key because sometimes we enter into moments where we're excited, it feels good, we get off with a full head of steam, but eventually we're going to grind to a halt if we don't do these things. The first is to set some small goals. A key to living joy is to have small goals that are attainable so we can celebrate those wins. That's absolutely critical. When we set the small goal and we can achieve it, we can celebrate a win, because sometimes the big win is pretty far off. Sometimes the big win is graduating from school, but I still have 4 years to graduate from school. So how can I keep up the excitement I have about this new beginning when it seems so far away? Celebrate when you turn in the midterm. Celebrate when you turn in the final. Celebrate when the semester is done. Celebrate appropriately for all of you college students. Find appropriate ways to celebrate, but celebrate the wins. We can only do that with small goals. I've seen new beginnings fail in any realm, professionally, personally, because people set the big goal but never have benchmarks on how to get there. Make sure you make affirmation and praise a part of new beginnings. This is especially true if you're leading a new beginning as a team, or you have somebody who's starting out on your team. You've got a new member of your parish staff. You've got a new teammate. Make sure that you are heaping affirmation and praise on that person, especially when they do something well. If you have a team that's going through a new change, or your team's going through a new beginning, there's something new happening at your parish, find places where people are leaning into that change and praise it. People need to hear that. It's a way of celebrating the small victories. And if you're embarking on a personal change, make sure you're giving affirmation and praise to yourself. Find ways to affirm the good things that have happened, and make sure that support network, that we cultivated earlier when we were remembering why, that those connections know that they should be heaping some praise and affirmation on you as well. Don't let your wins go, even if they're small. That is a key to long-term success. And the last piece here is prayer and hope. St. Paul says, to the Thessalonians, rejoice always, pray unceasingly. Prayer and joy are interconnected. Hope is interconnected with these things, because ultimately, when we talk about living joy, we're talking about living in the love of the Lord. We're talking about having the ability to contextualize all change to something that is much, much bigger. And what is the bigger thing? That all change opens us up to the new ways that God wants to work in our lives. And I think that's the key here. This is not just a practical webinar, but it's the fact that when we change and our life is shook up, Jesus can enter into new ways. That as we're seeing the world in a new lens, whether it's through a voluntary positive change or an involuntary negative change, that Christ is there in those moments, waiting to call us forward to something new. Shaking us out of our routine allows us to encounter the Lord in a new way and have open hands to grasp a hold of what he wants to lead us toward as we become and grow into greater and greater disciples who are after the Lord's heart. That's why coupling these things with prayer and a great hope that ultimately all of our beginnings lead to this one big beginning, which is death and an entrance into eternal life. And that's the contextualization. Our beginnings can be successful with these practices, but more so, our beginnings can be an opportunity for metanoia, for conversion and a spiritual awakening that draws us closer to Christ if we keep prayer at the center of it. If we keep the recognition that these new beginnings can be a thing that work for our good, and not our good in terms of material success or financial success or affirmation or praise from the world, but our good in the sense that they can make us holier. And if we keep Christ at the center of every beginning, at the center of every change, that holiness can shine through in a profound way, because every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. And one day, you and I have an end. We have a hard stop on our mortality, but it's not the end. My kids asked me a while ago, hey, where was I before I was born? And I love that question because I get to give them this really weird existential answer. I tell them, you were nowhere. You didn't exist. You were nothing before you were born. Before you were conceived by your mom, before you were in your mom's belly, you were nothing. But now you live forever. You have no stop. There was a time that you were not, but there will never be a time that you will not be. That's the eternal reality that we lean into. Every new beginning comes from some other's beginning's end, and one day we die, but it's not the end, is it? It's just the stage for a new beginning. And if we live each of our little beginnings well in prayer and joy and hope, we'll be able to find that that new beginning is one into eternal life with our Lord. And that's an absolute gift. We're going to take a couple questions, but before we do, I always like to throw out a reading list at the end of these webinars. These are a couple of the sources where I've pulled information for this webinar that you might want to look into if you are a corporate leader, if you're just looking for some personal development. These are specifically leadership focused, but they're great for personal development too. Simon Sinek, Start With Why. John Kotter, this book is like perennial on leading change in organizations. It's called Leading Change. Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, is a great book on vulnerability. And we talk about vulnerability and emotional safety and psychological safety and leading teams. I mentioned this earlier. John Acuff has a book called Do Over, which is about making career jumps on how we start new things in our career. And Kim Scott has a book called Radical Candor, which is about having wholehearted and honest conversations at work, and how, again, you build an environment and a culture of stability and safety so that when you initiate change, people are willing to do that. And then, of course, there's my book, which is Beginning Well, 7 Spiritual Practices for the First Year of Almost Anything, where we can read a little bit more about finding your Jedi, living joy, how we leave the past behind and embrace new things, and how we are able to create rituals and stability and so much more, so that our new beginnings are not simply moments for success materially, but moments for spiritual growth as well. And then, of course, if you would like to follow me on social media and stay connected there, I know that we only get a little bit of time to connect here. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, check out my website, joelstepanek.com. I love to share more of these types of tips and tidbits with you as well. So go ahead and sign up there. I'm going to stop this screen share, and we'll take some questions.
Yes, absolutely. Joel, thank you so much. This was super motivating, and I don't know, very hopeful, very, very challenging, but in a really positive way. So I appreciate you sharing all of this. And I want to tell everybody that I will definitely include your reading list in the follow-up email that goes out tomorrow, as well as your different handles on where people can follow you too. So you don't have to worry about trying to get all that down. We invite anyone now to submit a question to Joel, and as we wait for those to come in, I was just thinking as you were talking, do you think, or is there a most common thing that people fail to do when they have, when they're encountering or dealing with a new beginning, a change in their life?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people fail to do is have like an opportunity where they're grieving whatever they're leaving behind. And I think part of that is because sometimes we have like a positive new beginning and we want to just be happy for that new beginning, right? And we're like, oh, why would I be sad about what I'm leaving behind? This new thing is so great. And or like we're sad about what we're leaving behind and we don't like to feel sad. So we're like, I'm just going to kind of ignore that emotion. But grieving is important because it provides a sense of closure. And so I think a lot of times people don't really grieve what they're leaving behind. And it doesn't have to be like sad, like I'm weeping into my hands, but having some sort of, again, ritual that brings closure to it. I think that was the initial idea behind bachelor and bachelorette parties, which has evolved into something not that way. But the idea of like, let's celebrate the end of your life as a single person and like, rejoice in that and kind of grieve that and bring a sense of closure to that, because you're going to be a married person and you're not just going to be yourself anymore. And I think sometimes people don't do that, and then the ghosts of their past haunt them, and it makes it really hard to begin. That's what happened to us when we moved to Arizona. We just didn't grieve leaving Wisconsin, and it came back, and we never let that go.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point. All right, we've got some questions coming in. How do you avoid negativity around you, especially where you're in like the involuntary negative or the voluntary negative?
Yeah, and I think that's where, when you lean into for both of these things, I think, but for the voluntary negative, it really is remembering, your why. And I think this is a piece where I struggle with it a little bit in trying to get my read on how I feel about something from other people. And that's not a good thing. If I'm trying to get the light from outside of me, like there's always going to be shadows in my heart. But if the light is internal, like that's going to cast those shadows out. And I think sometimes when we engage in change, especially something that's going to be good for us, and there's negativity around it, what happens is we let our own voice be drowned out. So I think it's going back to why. How do I like, hey, this isn't for you. I think this happens sometimes with people who are getting sober, when they have friends who like also maybe need to get sober, but are feeling like called out. And so they can be very negative. Like, how would you think you're better than us and you're not going to drink anymore? And that's why going back to like, well, no, this is about me. And sometimes in those situations, it's cutting people it's cutting people off. I think when you find yourself in an involuntary and negative situation, you may not be able to change this. This can happen corporately in a company when like there's a big change that nobody likes. And I think in there, it's trying to find aspects of the change that, again, if it's something like that, that perhaps are positive that you can sort of lean out of. Or again, sometimes it's a change that is, the death of somebody. And I think that's where finding counseling to help work through some of those pieces and bring closure and work through that grief well is absolutely critical.
Yes. Got a lot of questions about the Jedi, right? Finding a Jedi.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you go about, finding someone who can fill that role? And then somebody else says, if you find your Jedi, is there a non-creepy way to ask them to be your mentor?
Yeah, I think these are such good questions. We like really long for mentorship, I think, in our society,
Mhm.
and it's hard. And I think it's hard to find a mentor for a lot of reasons. I think one of those reasons is because we haven't really built up a culture of that, because people are afraid. Like they're afraid to mentor other people, especially internal to companies, because they're like, that person's going to take my job. Or we like actually are kind of prideful about the knowledge we've learned. Like a good mentor is going to give you everything that person knows for free. Like they're just going to dump it on you because in their mind they're like, I want you to be better than me. But I think a lot of times what happens is that people are like, no, like you got to earn your lumps, kid. Like you need to figure it out on your own. Do you know how, like, do you know what I went through? And that's just a horrible way of thinking, but we think that, right? We have a fear of being forgotten. So I think there are people out there though who are we have those bad experiences, but there are people who want to give that to us. I found that like the best way to sort of strike up these relationships is to just find somebody who maybe you know a little bit and be like, hey, can I pick your brain over coffee? Could I ask you a couple of questions? Like, and then it's not like a like, hey, will you be my mentor? I really admire you and think you're great. But you can kind of
Mhm.
actually open the door for a more organic relationship. And then yeah, at the end of that, just to say, hey, thank you so much. This has really been great. Can I contact you if some more questions come up? And a lot of times that will sort of grow into a more regular meeting, because you have to understand, like the people who you want to be your mentors, one, are going to be flattered when you ask them to share their expertise, and two, they're going to want to. But I think usually it's just taking that first step to like, hey, could I pick your brain about a couple of things? Could I ask you some questions? And that will help out a lot. And then like again, you might get to your relation to a point where you say, hey, could we like meet on a more regular mentor basis? And usually by that point, somebody's going to be very flattered. It doesn't seem super creepy.
Yeah, that's a great way to approach that. I love that. Can I pick your brain?
Mm-hmm.
How about we have a question here. We're looking for ways to support marriages. Would you consider this a good book for those newly married?
Yeah, 100%. I think when I wrote this book, this has been a book I've wanted to write for over 6 years. And so it is so like I have right here. It's so cool to hold this in my hand. This book is great for new marriages without a doubt. I would highly recommend that your marriage prep classes, you give a copy of this to everybody, have them work through it. I think it's great for seminarians. I think it's good for college students, but for married couples especially, the first year of your marriage is so critical because you're laying the groundwork and the habits and the communication pieces that are going to really actually last a long time. And a lot of people don't know how to navigate that. So I think this would be
Mhm.
tremendously helpful for
Yeah,
any marriage prep class, any engaged couples, without a doubt.
yeah, absolutely. Um, can you touch on vision casting a little more? Does that include vision boards, for example?
I'm not as familiar with vision boards. I'm coming from, again, organizational development. I think when we talk about vision, at its most simple, it's this is my desired future state. I think if we're talking about vision boards in the sense of like manifesting, I'm not with that. I think more of like if you're thinking from the sense of I need some visual of where I want to go. I
Right.
think there's sort of a sub uh, thing here where some people are like, yeah, like there's a spiritual element to it. Like if I put up pictures and I dream about it, it has to come true.
Mm.
So when I talk about vision casting, what I mean is like I know and can articulate where I want to be. This is my desired future state. And I need that because then I work towards it. And again, it has to be something that is, I'll say flexible. So like I have a friend who, again, I'm thinking about fitness here in his fitness journey and wanting to become healthier. His training coach at Orange Theory was like, hey, what's your goal? And he's like, I want to lose 20 pounds or whatever. And the guy was like, that's a terrible goal. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, because it's not like, that's not a vision. That's not a vision of something, versus like, I want to be able to run races until I'm 50. I want to be able to keep up with my kids. Like, what is my desired future state? And I think actually, like, sometimes we know, but we don't write it down. Like, specifically, what is it that you're going for? What's the long-term horizon? What am I running towards? And then when I get discouraged, I can look up and say, again, for me, it was, yeah, but like, I want to be healthy for my kids. I want to be, able to do that. For other people, it might be, I want to, get my doctorate. And so what am I imagining? I'm imagining a world where I have my doctorate, or I'm imagining, this is what I want. And then you can articulate that to people like, why are you doing this? Because like, I want to live in a world where I'm sober. Like, I imagine myself as a sober person, and that's really important to me. And to think about, what will your life be like in that? What does that mean for you to realize that? And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at here.
Yes, great. Um, Someone says here, thank you for this very inspirational and informative presentation. This will definitely help with change in our ministries after COVID. Yes,
Yeah, you're welcome. I think that's great. And I think that's the thing. Right now, we have an opportunity to change, but I think managing change is hard for people. We like the status quo, but status quo is not going to work
yeah,
anymore. And I think
right.
that grid, go to that grid and say, plot people out. How are people going to perceive this? Who's going to perceive this as a positive and voluntary change? Who's going to feel forced into this? Who's going to feel like it's involuntary, but it's positive? And then you kind of maybe know even how to work with those people a little bit more to say, okay, these people are really going to need stability. These people are going to have to live joy and celebrate the wins. And all of these things are important to beginnings and change, but
Hmm.
some need a little bit more emphasis than others, depending on where you fall.
Hmm. You must think about the timing of this book, right? You've wanted to write it for so long, but it almost feels like
Yeah,
it's providential that it's coming out right now in which the world has experienced so much change, you know.
I think we're all beginning in a way. And again, I
Yeah.
think the merit is that we can be successful in our new beginnings. They can lay the groundwork for something, but there's also just a huge spiritual component to it that we can take advantage of and grow as disciples. And that's what excites me the most about it.
Hmm. Yeah. And you have in your book, you have a lot more with biblical references and spiritual practices too.
Yeah, and that's really the emphasis, is that every
Hmm.
every practical practice in the book has a spiritual virtue or component attached
Hmm.
to it. So you get a twofer. You get to practice the practical, but then in that you get to grow spiritually. And I think that if you can accomplish that, I'm all about
Absolutely.
that compounding effect. Yep.
Hmm. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. What do you do when you have experienced an ending and have no new beginning in sight?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think there's a reframing that has to take place there, because there is a new beginning. The new beginning is life without that thing, And I think and that's sort of it may be a difficult way to frame it, but like, again, I lost a job and I don't have another job lined up. All right, like, so now I'm beginning my time as a person seeking another job, you know. And even reframing that, like, what am I doing now? I'm a job seeker. And even embracing that, like, this is my new beginning. And it might be a short beginning, it might be a short phase of life, but this is the new phase of my life. Or that relationship ended, okay, so this is my beginning as a single person after that relationship. And again, grieving
Mhm.
those things and letting them go, but there's always a new beginning, even if the beginning is just, it's life without that thing now. So what does that
Mhm.
look like?
Love that. I think that's a great place to end here. Um, as always, we encourage you, or we just want to offer a little discount for you to purchase these books. So, Beginning Well, obviously the one you talked about today,
Mm-hmm.
Joel, and then your previous book with us, Chasing Humility: 8 Ways to Shape a Christian Heart. I think you talked about that idea you said earlier about how some people in leadership roles don't want to share their knowledge
Hmm.
with you, right? And you talked about that in Chasing Humility. Another excellent, excellent book I highly recommend. So you can use webinar 0215 when ordering at avemariapress.com, and that's good until the 25th of February. Joel, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, and for you to share your enthusiasm with us. So we thank you. We
Thanks,
won't
Erin.
Absolutely. We won't have a webinar next week, but we'll be back here March 1st. This, for some of you who might remember, was supposed to be in the fall or earlier this year, actually, and due to some reasons, we had to reschedule it. So Andres Arango will share with us his book about spirituality and Jesus as our model. This will be presented in Spanish only. Just wanted you to know that, and feel free to share this, of course, with anybody, any of your family or friends who are Spanish speaking. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Joel, we'll see you soon. Take care,
Thanks, Erin. Take
everybody.
care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.